Hi, welcome to Making Waves on Purpose. Today I'm joined by Josh Henretig. Josh is the Managing Director of Climate Intelligence for Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. I've known him for years. I talk a little bit about this, but he turned me around on Science-Based Targets Initiative. I was definitely skeptical, but he really helped me understand its value and think that through. He and I have known each other for 10 or 15 years, and I've always enjoyed Josh. He's super smart and has done a lot of things. He's now at RMI, but I met him when he spent maybe 17 years at Microsoft doing a number of things, including AI for Earth and working on their carbon commitments. So really great conversation, really learned a lot about his work, which I think is incredibly important work and we should all be following. So without further ado, I bring you Josh from RMI. Hey, Josh, thanks for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here, Jeff. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fabulous. Well, tell us what you're doing these days. Climate intelligence at RMI. What's that?
Yeah, so RMI, for those who don't know, is Rocky Mountain Institute. We're over 40 years old, a nonprofit organization focused on the energy transition. I am about a year and a half into my role as a managing director leading our climate intelligence program.
That's fabulous. Tell us about climate intelligence. What does that mean in this context?
Yeah, climate intelligence is something that the organization really felt it needed with kind of a number of important trends and observations in the world at large. And that is, generally speaking, with as much ambition as there is in this world around climate action, what often we lack is that translation from ambition into action, right? A lot of people have now converged on whether it's science-based targets or some other lofty goal. But the real work to figure out what needs to get done by when in order to, influence these timelines and these outcomes, ideally within a 1.5 degree trajectory, is really consequential. And what we know about the role of data and technology is that they're really powerful tools, more powerful today than they were even 3, 5, 10 years ago. What can we lean in when it comes to data and technology to really shape and inform how we close that ambition action gap?
I love that. I've been talking to a lot of clients lately, and what I've seen is that a tremendous number of C-suite executives and board members signed off on net zero goals without truly understanding what net zero meant, nor what it would mean for their company and business model. So I love this idea of helping them on that runway to figure out, what have we signed up for? How do we do this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, for us, there's lots of ways in which you can apply data and analytics and insights and even technology itself. And so where we've decided to start kind of our work and invest in specific projects and insights and thought leadership and industry activation and kind of all the things that RMI has historically been known for, is really around how do we leverage the power of markets, right? Markets have unified our economies, our society. They've brought, health and well-being and livelihoods to, culture and to cities and to industry. They grow seemingly exponentially, almost to a fault, which we can come back to. But there's some real power there that we would love to be able to tap into. Except we want to be able to tap into a world in which the markets that we need and want can be differentiated through things like climate-related performance. And so, just as you go in today to a supermarket and make decisions about the food you eat based on the nutrition that you may have health risks or concerns about, right? How much sodium, how much sugar, how much organics? Is it meat or no meat? All these things today are made easier because of the consistent labeling that exists for many of the foods we have today. Well, that's just not true for many of the commodities that we all depend on and buy. And so for really hard to abate sectors like steel, like cement, like aluminum, today we're largely holding up kind of these vague marketing claims and signaling that we want green steel or we want low impact aluminum for our buildings, for our computers, for our other kind of infrastructure. But we have not done a great job of setting specific ground rules for performance. What does it actually mean to develop and deliver these things? And so when you start kind of teasing this apart, you get into the complexities that we have today in our supply chains. Like, how does chain of custody work for these commodities? How do markets actually evolve based on some of this information and ultimately these decisions that get made across boundaries, across geographies, and within these sectors?
I think that that's so important. I mean, because what you said about markets, I think is quite right, and it's the whole theory of change that this community is built around ESG and engaging investors in this effort. And in some ways, the investors are now learning that the emperor has no clothes, not in the sense that the value proposition offered by ESG investments isn't there, but that we really don't know what best in class ESG looks like because there's not enough data behind it. There's not enough understanding of how to move within these industries. But that's getting better and better every day. You see companies coming out. I saw today Delta came out with a new sustainability plan, and I won't comment on if it's great or not great, but it is the next evolution in their path. So you mentioned earlier when we were in the green room talking about changing the impact equation. Tell me a little bit about your thinking there.
Yeah, so I mean, RMI takes a very pragmatic approach to a lot of these kind of complex problems, and and we essentially think about like a theory of change that we think needs to exist in this case for healthy climate differentiated markets to prosper. And so one of the things that we ask ourselves is like, well, what needs to be true in these markets to align with a 1.5 degree future? Well, one of the things that we need is we need better transparency and visibility into what the emissions are that we're even talking about. Whether that's emissions coming from a steel plant or an oil and gas refinery or a data center, we need to have a common understanding of what those emissions are, where they're coming from, who's accountable. The next step in our kind of theory of change here is then having a mechanism by which we can both analyze but ultimately attribute those emissions to a source. That is more easily done in kind of the categories of scope 1 and 2, where you can kind of define clear realms of responsibility. It becomes much more complex when you start talking about, commodities and different tiers of our value chains, right? And so, we're leaning into that to really figure out how both the analysis, but also the attribution works. And then ultimately, how does some of these technologies factor in that can help us decipher some of these things like traceability and blockchain and chain of custody and even remote sensing, where, delivering new insights now through observational satellites is really powerful in what it tells us about what we can observe relative to what we're experiencing on the ground. So with attribution, kind of handled or at least managed, then we think about what are the scaling mechanisms for transferring this knowledge across complex stakeholder groups, like what is the role of digital communications in that? And finally, sort of how do we think about standardizing these mechanisms? What do the performance standards need to look like for some of these commodities and performance differentiation? We don't necessarily want to become those bodies, but we recognize that they need to be in place. We need to be able to agree on those set of ground rules. We need to have differentiation, and we need organizations who can arbitrate that. And so we look for those kind of bodies of work and lean into them, or in some cases generate those from scratch if they need to be in place.
So in some ways, it's like looking at the ecosystem or the puzzle and figuring out what pieces are missing to complete the puzzle. And they might be small, or they might be big, or they might be yours to own or not. But it's about trying to complete, the picture and the missing connection points. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So tell me, how do companies and or other actors describe that ecosystem, like other nonprofits or regulators or companies in their supply chains? How do you engage with people and in people that might be listening who have held roles like or hold roles like you and I have held in the past? How do they get engaged with you?
Well, they can reach out, of course, and we would love to know kind of where these people and organizations are and their relationship to specific sectors or specific issues. I think within the value chain or within our theory of change that I described, we are starting to do work with a whole range of organizations that are participating in this kind of class of emissions visibility and discovery. These are folks like Climate Trace, which is funded and supported by Al Gore and others. We work with private sector stakeholders who are building solutions around monitoring, reporting, and verification, or MRV, known in other worlds. And collectively, these represent meaningful efforts to leverage data and technology to really shine a spotlight on emissions, on visibility, on verification, and kind of impact. And so we're looking to better understand their needs, figure out what's missing in bringing kind of a more unified approach or understanding to the table. And then when it comes to kind of standards bodies or performance benchmarks and meaningful action in that category, this is where it kind of depends on which sector we're talking about. For work that we were doing and are doing in, say, natural gas, we found that there was a real vacancy in any one organization's ability to evaluate and measure the relative climate intensity of methane emissions. And so we helped put in place a new nonprofit organization called MIQ, which today is helping to kind of certify over 4% of the entire global gas market by virtue of how intense those natural gas emissions are. And so by creating a market for certified natural gas, we in turn are encouraging those operators to really embrace more sustainable, better management protocols, for those assets, and ultimately bring us to a lower emissions future.
I love that. I love that. I wonder if the methane and natural gas question was that others didn't want to touch it because for a long time in the environmental movement, it was seen as somehow treasonous to engage around natural gas as a bridge fuel. We shouldn't use that. We should go directly from fossil fuels to renewables and not use natural gas. But I think, I'm glad to hear that you and others, Matt Arnold, when he was at JP Morgan Chase, if memory serves, they were the largest investor in natural gas, and they created a program around how to make those investments and help their clients do that more sustainably. So I'm really excited to hear that work is happening because I think it's not likely to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that the reality of any transition is that you need to acknowledge there is a before and after. And we need to create the necessary bridges and pathways for all sectors of our society to really help us transition to a fully sustainable clean energy future. And so, I think among the work that we do at RMI is really figure out what those pathways are and not create excuses for those organizations or some mechanism of delay, but really how do we get very practical about what those transition pathways are and help facilitate a faster transition as a result of those pathways.
Yeah. And I know that, like the war in Europe, the war in Ukraine changes the whole energy dialogue and energy security and whatnot. And not everybody can go as fast as like Germany, it seems, has gone. So, well, that's fabulous. I love these ideas. I have to thank you, Josh, too. You turned me around on Science-Based Targets Initiative. For a long time, I will fully admit, I was a skeptic for a long time for a couple of reasons. One, I always said, who died and made, science-based targets God on this? And secondly, I kind of admire IBM's stance on Scope 3 emissions, which, whether I agree with it or not, I certainly admire it. They've kind of, against the odds, kind of claimed, hey, that's not ours. We have Scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is somebody else's. I don't think it's that cut and dried, but I do think that there's dialogue still. And I love the idea of like allocation and attribution and understanding who owns what, because I think that's a critical part of this.
Yeah, we have to sort that out. I think we exist in a world today where it's very easy to look upstream or downstream and expect or hope that someone else is going to solve that portion of the problem. And at some level, we need to just lean into these complex problems, leverage some of the amazing innovations that we have that today are, fueling in hyper scale some incredible growth in our economy. Like just take stock of the revelations that ChatGPT and these large language models are providing us, why can't we turn these powerful solutions to some of our more pressing problems in the climate space and take some responsibility for kind of leveraging these powerful tools to solve or at least address some of these critical questions? So while I tend to agree that there's multiple stakeholders responsible for things like products as they flow through the supply chain, we got to start figuring out how to stitch together this patchwork of stakeholders to really make sure that somebody's left holding the bag at the end of the day.
Yep, or a group of people. I love it. I love it. Super important. So tell us something you're excited about on the horizon at work or personally that you're doing that's exciting you.
What's exciting to me? Well, my team gets me really excited primarily because of their ambition, but also because I see these colleagues of mine as in many ways kind of first responders to some of these really important issues in climate that we're talking about. So I'm really excited about the opportunities, for example, for voluntary carbon markets to play as part of a solution in helping us scale to meet this 1.5 degree challenge. We're doing some incredible work there to really better understand how credits can truly be differentiated by their sort of performance profile and how we can consistently understand which credits are suitable for which type of purposes and how some of these benefits and co-benefits can flow more effectively. I'm excited about, how we think about leveraging tools like satellite technology to really analyze and understand where emissions are coming from in sectors like oil and gas, where, we can actually insert decisions and interventions that are helping those operators manage those supplies more responsibly. And I'm also excited for some of the work that we're doing in sectors like steel and aluminum, where, as I started to allude earlier, is really starting with a foundation of what is the accounting methodology we need to be able to differentiate commodities from their source to their store shelf, if you will, right? How do we do the math on what emissions add up to? How can they be tracked and traced, through these value chains? And ultimately, how do powerful buyers really send a very specific signal to those downstream stakeholders that helps exercise a preference for these products and or commodities can be differentiated by their performance? So we got some really exciting work happening with some real companies in these sectors looking to both experiment, but also contribute to some shared knowledge that we like to be able to publish and make open source.
I love that. And I love that you're doing the work on voluntary carbon markets. I'm a believer that if we're going to hold ourselves accountable for scope 3, we need to be able to use all the tools in the toolbox, but we need to make sure that those tools are effective. So I'm glad to have you on the case, especially after the John Oliver and Guardian pieces and the bruising critique that carbon markets have taken of late.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we need criticism, but we also need people to lean in and find a direct pathway through that criticism, right? Because as you said, they are a viable solution that we need to figure out how to get the best out of, right? And today's kind of opaque, non-transparent ecosystem is something that we need to kind of shine a spotlight on and bring more visibility and awareness to how these markets can work to our advantage and how they fit in the grander mitigation hierarchy of need.
I love it. I love it. And I love the idea that we can use data and, dare I say, climate intelligence to help us answer the, it depends answer that has been so prevalent in corporate responsibility or sustainability. When you'd ask somebody a question and they would say, it depends. And it's the most aggravating, answer in the space, but it's been true for a long time. Hopefully your work can help continue to demystify that.
Absolutely. If we can know your buying behaviors at 3:30 in the afternoon, Jeff, based on all the algorithms and technology assets that sit in our households today, why can't we do the same for some of these important considerations around climate? We have the capability, and now we just need to kind of focus that power in very specific ways.
Love it. Love it. Thanks so much, Josh. We'll have you back again because there's more to discuss, I'm sure. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Jeff. Always fun to catch up.
Yep. Be well. Take care.
Take care.